All right, welcome everybody to today's webinar entitled Building a Niche Practice and the Future of Personalized Physical Therapy. I'm Dr. Brett Kestenbaum, and I'm here with Frank Benedetto. Frank is a double board certified doctor of physical therapy and strength coach. He is also a serial entrepreneur, with his newest venture being Counter-Strike, which is an online performance coaching platform for combat athletes. Frank, could you, I know I just did a brief introduction there, but can you take us through your background and define maybe more of that serial entrepreneur term for us?
Sure. First off, thanks for having me. I'm pretty excited to be here and get involved with your company. I love what you guys are doing. As far as my background goes, I am a clinician first and foremost who also has a passion for business, and I think that's important to hear because
Yep.
I think there's a bifurcation, and it's totally okay to be a business person who's got an interest in physical therapy or a physical therapist who happens to also be in business. But
Hmm.
I share equal passions for both. So I spent the first 6, 7 years of my career just getting as credentialed as possible. Didn't feel like I really graduated and knew enough, like so many of us do. And then when I felt ready, I launched a business called Provier with a partner, Dr. Cedric Haddad,
Hmm.
and that business was 100% direct access, direct to consumer, located inside fitness facilities and strength and conditioning facilities. And we grew that brand. We learned a hell of a lot, grew it, and sold it within 4 years and 4 months. So we built a multi-location brand and then sold that off. And I, in the closing phase of that sale, I had started my next venture, Counter Strike.
Excellent. Yeah, that's super exciting, and congrats on the success there. I know um, certainly that's not an easy feat to accomplish. So congrats on that.
Thank you.
Can you take us through that timeline? So I know there's a lot of physical therapists out there that think about entrepreneurship and think about business, but they really don't know where to start or what that can look like. So take us through, let's call it graduation to the first time you started Provier.
Okay. So graduated back in 2008, and actually it was one signature away from opening my clinic the day I graduated. I had negotiated a tiny lease inside of a gym back in 2008, and my first employer advised me against it. And I still have mixed feelings about whether I did the right thing or not by not at least diving in part time right off the bat. But that entrepreneurial spirit had always been in me, even since I was a teenager. I could tell you some funny stories about that later if you want. But I held off one as a new grad and decided to go fully into the art, and the clinical learning. Back then, there really weren't residencies. If there were, they're far and few between. So it was all self study or mentorships for the OCS. Studied for the OCS, failed after my first
All
attempt.
right.
6 points, missed that one, and studied immediately again, passed it. Next year, third year out, became board certified in sports. I think I was at that time. Somebody had told me I was the youngest person to ever become double board certified in PT at that stage. I'm sure it's somebody
Mhm.
beat it now with the new way it's becoming popular. Um, and I really stayed focused on just growing my clinical skill sets. I mean, that's the only thing that was on my mind for 6, 7 years. And only when I started to deviate from the, let's say, common practices that I was seeing in that first workplace did I start to decide that I was going to make the leap. And yeah, it was a scary, tough decision. I had already had kids. I did not save up a tremendous amount of money. I started from a pretty risky place, but
Mhm.
I had just wholehearted belief that the product that I had visioned was one that people were going to enjoy and need, and a business model that, in theory, was very efficient, which held to be true.
Awesome. So I want to talk a little bit more about that, and I know the focus of this is going to be on building a niche practice, but let's talk about mindset there and jumping in, because a lot of entrepreneurs, or I should say, a lot of people who want to be entrepreneurs have this fear. And there's something holding them back, especially in the PT world, because we have a career that is, we'll call it safe.
Right.
And a lot of people don't want to jump out of that. So how, I know you described that you had a belief in what you were doing, but what was really that turning point for you that got you over the edge to take the risk, even though you had a family to look after?
You know, it's so hard to like look back and give you a short answer, but it was that the product that I had imagined was better than what I was currently doing, and what I currently was doing was working. So the business that I was at was successful, profitable, growing, but I still had a vision for a better way, and also a very specific market that was in even greater need. So I think the triangulation of just believing that the people I wanted to serve truly were ready and needed it, that the product was going to be amazing, and that the way in which I was going to test it was relatively low risk, in the sense of going inside of a gym. There was low overhead, so
Right.
I think that I could rationalize the risk by triangulating those three thoughts.
Perfect. And that's one of the benefits of being a PT as well. There's well, a lot of benefits to being a PT, but two of them when it comes to the entrepreneurial side of things is that you can start a business with very low risk in two ways. One, you can take a per diem job and you
Yep.
can get paid while you take your risk, on the, or you can work your 9 to 5, and then in the other hours of the day, there's plenty left in the day. You can do your other stuff. And then the other side of it is that you can do things with low overhead by thinking creatively, like leveraging a gym that already exists in space
Right.
or building a partnership, something like that. So
Yeah.
take us through your business model and take us through your thought there when you were describing a better product for the consumer, which would be your patients or clients.
When I graduated, and it was like the heyday of like ultrasound and stim. So it would
Hmm.
be like stim for 8 to 10 minutes, manual therapy for 8 to 20 minutes, exercise for 10 to 15 minutes, and then more stim at the end. That was the model that I had graduated into, was taught, and had believed, because that's you tend to believe as a new grad what you were taught. And when I started to dive deeper into the research, I started to realize that, at least in my belief pattern, that the research was pointing to exercise as being the main driver of change. And I wanted to create a model where that was the emphasis, and less so modalities. And we still did some manual therapy back at the Provir model, but it was very high level. It would be like
Hmm.
joint mobilization or something skilled. It was never massage. So I had imagined a model without fluff, and without where the product was exclusively built for the end in mind of the athlete, not the billing strategy. So if you go billing strategy first, you have to bill stim and ultrasound. If you do
Hmm.
patient first, you're most likely not going to be billing those things.
And then what was the end result of that when you thought about it in the opposite way that most clinics do?
Yeah, I would say that the short term result was like, what I would say, like mini virality. So we would go into a gym, and it would just flourish and explode. Most of the time we didn't even make flyers. It was our first in gym startup. We didn't have business cards or a sign. It was just word of mouth, word of mouth, word of mouth. That if you actually want to get fixed, if you actually want to fix your issue, this is where you need to go. And the combination of the convenience factor of being there, along with being pretty vocal about that we're different, really made those athletes gravitate towards us.
So now what are the foundations of building a niche PT practice and turning it into an actual business?
So I would say the good question, the where I'd like to go with that, is that Provir was something for high school, college athletes and their parents. And in my mind, looking back, that still wasn't niche enough to grow big. And if you identify the smallest possible niche that you can serve, I think that's actually what leads you to have the most viability for a true bigger business. So when you just try to serve active people, which is
Hmm.
something that I hear constantly, is that we serve active people, or we help active people without medications and things like that. That's good. That's a great mission. I believe in that. However, I don't know how many people walk around feeling like they're an active person and resonate with that title. If you are a CrossFitter, you probably resonate with the identity CrossFit, or martial artist. In my case, you identify as a combat athlete. But as an active person, I think that's more for internally. That's more for us. Whereas the key to getting into a niche, the first one is to actually decide which micro population you care enough about to go all in on.
So this is interesting and very important because it's counterintuitive. What you just described is to build a bigger business, you have to talk to a smaller audience.
Yes.
So take us through
Otherwise,
that
you're
a little
talking to
further.
no one.
Yeah, so
Yeah. If
take
you,
us
if,
through that exactly.
Sure. So if you build a business and make it for everyone, you will be talking to no one. No one will hear your message and think, wow, this is for me. This is going to be it's going to come across as a very generic product that once people interact with, then yes, some people will most likely spread word of mouth, but you will be limited by the to that one modality. Instead of when you're a niche, you become the only choice or the preferred choice or the obvious choice when you're talking to a group of people where you could literally predict their every need, and you can only do that if you're talking to a specific niche.
Now, when you describe talking to, what do you mean by that?
Everything in your branding. So when every social media post, every piece of marketing literature, the tagline you put on the business card, you need to be thinking of a single person that's within the niche. So when we put any content out, what we are trying to do is think of the combat sport athlete that we are talking to in that moment, and that helps keep the emphasis always on the end user and not ourselves. So we're prone as a profession to go into business and list all the things that we can do. So we can do corrective exercise, we can do massage, manual therapy, we can do evaluations, we could do corrective exercise screens. But the reality is that the end user actually doesn't care about any of that at all. They care about being able to run without pain. They care about being able to finish a marathon or compete in a fight. You might use those tools to make sure that outcome happens, but we need to phrase everything that we say in terms of the actual athlete themselves or the consumer end user.
Yeah, and that's the exact right focus that you have to have when you're thinking of a marketing message. Do not promote features, promote the benefits, promote what
Yes.
the end user is trying to do or accomplish. Very important and a critical mistake that a lot of people make, especially in the beginning. Usually, if you go with it for a long enough time, you'll correct that. But also on the points that you have there, really great points. You're describing what would be considered as a blue ocean strategy as opposed to a red ocean strategy, because if you're talking about the community of active people, your competition is ultimately every single gym out there, every single physical therapist out there, every single
Right.
chiropractor out there, every single orthopedist out there. And when you're taking it and you're describing that your business of helping combat athletes perform better, whatever it is, your competition has now dwindled down to any other people who've niched out as specific as you have, which I don't know how many people are in that space with you.
Very
Um,
few.
but
Yeah.
yeah, very few. But brings us to our next point here, which is how do you know that your niche market is big enough to be a viable market for a business?
Two components there. You have to think about the mechanism of which you're going to serve them. And if you are a local only business and you are not traveling beyond 30 miles of a location, or people will not be traveling more than 30 miles in a location to you, then that obviously you do have to do some real market research. So if I was building a local martial arts based business, I would need to look around my surrounding area and actually do the math and say, okay, there's 50 martial arts studios, average membership of 150 people. How many of that would I need to capture to make the living that I want? And then you could do that math and see if there's a realistic calculation to be made.
So,
In Go.
so basically, you start with an educated guess by performing research, and your research could be um, really anything from just looking around town to going to taking census data to whatever it might be. Um, So how did you learn how to do that? Was it just an intuition, or were there resources that you used to understand how to perform your market research and make that critical decision?
Well, I can tell you that when we first launched, we had no idea about any of this. So I don't want to pretend like the entrepreneurial bug
Sure.
was so strong that I knew about these things. I
Uh-huh.
think they most of them spawned from failures from not having done it.
Hmm.
And I speak openly about I failed two clinics. I launched clinics, invested in the infrastructure, ton of operating costs and the personnel, and they didn't work out. And those are such ego hits and such hard things to swallow. But the only thing that makes you be able to move on is when you look back and say, okay, what didn't I do? Because these clinics are all successful. How come this didn't work? And I would say is through those failures that we started to become exposed or start seeking out further business knowledge.
Yeah.
The second part to that is when you go through the sale process and you interact with a company that's worth a $500 million, so $500 million company, and you see the level of tactical research that they perform, you realize, oh, okay, this is partially why they got so big,
Hmm.
and you could take a little pieces of that and say, what can I realistically recreate on a smaller scale?
Yeah, so this is important too. The life of an entrepreneur is a journey. You can't start in the fifth grade when you're in the third grade. You've got to go
No.
through the grades and you have to take your hits along the way. And what you just described is the difference between probably 20 years of failures that led this larger organization to understanding each of the component parts and then being able to tactically diagnose and figure out what was going on so that they could reproduce it over and over and over again. But
Yeah.
that whole journey takes a lot of time.
Yep.
So
Yep.
for physical therapists starting out, the best advice is start anywhere, and if you fail, you fail, but you'll learn from those failures, because the most important part is to go through a process which Ray Dalio, who is one of the largest hedge fund managers in the world, which he describes as called looping, which is you have a problem and then you want to diagnose that problem to the root cause, and then you want to create strategies to perform to get around them, and then you want to take the action to go. And you're going to go through these loops, meaning you're going to go up, you're going to run into a problem, you're going to then create solutions that are going to be uh, educated guesses on what to do as the next piece. And you may take a dip, but then you'll loop back around and always move in a forward direction, as
Yep.
long as you're taking that time to learn and identify what went wrong when it went wrong.
Yep, absolutely. I'm a co-founder of the Level Up Initiative, which is an education-based platform for new grad and student PTs to fill in the gaps interpersonally. Let's say is the short version that this our educations don't necessarily provide. And Last week I did a guest lecture on growth mindset, and Zach, the founder, Zach Gabor, has this great infographic where there's a challenging situation at the center, and you enter that, and then there's a choice. There's two directions. You take ownership and address it, or you deflect ownership, you blame, you sulk, you run away from it. And when you continue on both of those circles, what happens when you address these failures head on in that way is that you get better at addressing that circumstance or similar circumstances and just challenging situations in general. So if you could face a clinic failing and not have it destroy your confidence to the point where you then start making poor business decisions, which was very difficult for me at the time,
Hmm.
you will then get better at opening up businesses. But if I blamed the gym we were inside of, blamed the clinic manager, blamed the insurance plans, then I would actually not improve in any capacity on opening up my next location. So it's all about that growth mindset loop.
Okay, let's go through that mindset a little bit. How did you
Sure.
feel when you started the business, and then where did it go when you hit that point that you knew it was over, and you knew that was a failing business? And then how
It,
did you come out of it
yeah.
on the other side?
It was tough because I guess we knew it was those two were failing because we had such success at the others. So they were break even, marginally profitable. We could not get them to the point where they were kicking off the profit that the other locations were. So it
Hmm.
was just, no matter what we tried more gym integrations, or we tried changing things up with the schedule or whatever it was. But the reality was, it just wasn't a culture fit between us and the gym we happened to be inside of for one of them. And when we felt like had tried everything, that's when we started to pull the plug and said, we are spending now. Actually, I remember reading it. It was in a book called Scale. I think it was Scaling Up, where
Yeah, it's holding up my computer right now.
so when most people get to multi-location
Yeah.
businesses, more effort ends up being dedicated towards the parts that are not working, instead of the scaling the parts that are working. And we spend so much time trying to not fail or avoid failure or avoid the ego hit, that you end up spending more time trying to fix something that can only get as good as the others.
Hmm.
Whereas if you just cut that part of the business off and focus all of your time on what's working, you will then grow exponentially.
So what was the big lesson that you learned there from that particular series of events?
Oh man, there's so many. There's so many. It would be hard to say, but just popping open tables inside of a gym does not make you a business. And I don't think we realized how much we had done right in some of our other locations that felt more like coincidence at the time, or just that the business model of being inside of a gym was easier than it actually is. And that there has to be very specific strategy involved when launching future locations or launching inside of a gym.
Yeah, and also a big thing that resonates with me there is that the onus is essentially on, especially as you grow larger, understanding why you're making a decision, because no matter what decision you make, it's going to take your time, and your time is your most valuable resource. So in this case, you were describing something that you mentioned was marginally profitable, like it was still a viable business, but you still gave it up. And
Yeah.
what it sounds like is the reason why you gave it up is because you knew you could spend your time better and make something that's more profitable somewhere else.
Yeah, yeah, and fulfillment wise, I had towards the end of the Provier phase, I had a really life changing event personally happen where my sister was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer, and she pulled against all odds and survived and is and thriving now, thank God. But there was a 24 chemo treatments, 3 surgeries, a multi-year battle, and I was her primary support system and caretaker, if you will. And it put a lot of things in perspective. And I could tell you that the result of that experience made me realize that the business, while is always, and I always do mission oriented businesses. I can't actually bring myself to spend time on something for just money, or that I don't feel fully invested. I actually don't have the capacity to do it. It's almost to a fault.
Hmm.
So while I always ran mission driven businesses, the business still needed to be a vehicle to for me to live the life that I wanted to live and spend time with my family and fulfillment by spending time in the business that I actually enjoyed. So with Counter Strike, for example, maybe phrase it a little bit more clearly, I'm committed to this mission to make a real impact on the combat sports community, make a living while doing that, and a good living. I'd like to travel and take my family to different parts of the world one day, and have those type goals. But I also want to exclusively work with people that I enjoy working with inside the business, both as clients and as my own team. So that experience really changed everything. And it was right around that time where I said, "What are we doing? We're not having fun here. This is no longer fun trying to recoup this business." And that was what also partially led to us cutting it off.
Um, so you just mentioned your goals for wanting to live a specific type of lifestyle. Make a
Broke
clear
up there
point
just
for
a
some.
second. Yep.
Sorry, I want to help make a clear point for some people here. What have you sacrificed, and what are you still sacrificing to get to where you want to be?
In the beginning, I sacrificed a tremendous amount. It was, I can't count how many hours that I put in the beginning, because it was at the point where it was either succeed or there was no room. It was either just succeed and provide for your family, or fail miserably and have to go get a job again. There was no in between. And we did it. I pulled that off. I am more bald. You can't tell because I just shaved my head this morning, but I'm
Right.
more bald and more gray
Yeah.
as a result of all of that. But it paid off. And this time around, I'm building the business more intelligently with boundaries and guidelines. But I can tell you that I only had that luxury because of the sale of Provia that put me in that position.
Hmm.
So I think where you're going with this is something similar that I tell people is to take the maximum recoverable risk, and I equate that in the strength training world to, let's say if you're working with a high performance athlete, you can't just crush them on a Tuesday when they're going to spar on Wednesday. So you have to do the maximum recoverable workout. And there's different ways to phrase this. But basically, we need to try to strength train, but in a way in which that's intelligently designed that they will be able to spar the next day in combat sports. Well, in your life, you have to actually assess what you could maximally recover from. And if you have a little nest egg saved up, maybe you do decide, instead of putting that towards retirement or student loans, that you will have that to live off of to give you a little bit of a runway to build a business. Or if you don't have that, maybe the maximum recoverable risk is, on your off days, you pop open inside of a gym so that you can endure enough failures from that experiment to then one day launch a full time gig. But if you go all in, you need to be prepared to do whatever it takes. And sometimes that is gruesome.
Yeah, and I think the biggest benefit from going in that direction is not necessarily the outcome of whatever the business that you're trying to build is, but it's the increase in value that you personally learn. So you are able to now bring back to the community from taking all of those steps and taking the risk and building the muscles, as you're describing here, so that you have all this new knowledge and information to share with people or to use in a variety of different ways. So that is almost a guaranteed outcome of going through the entrepreneurial journey, in that direction, is that you will have that knowledge, you will have those greater foundations, you'll know so many more things, you'll be so much more capable of providing value to the community than if you just took the safe route and worked a 9 to 5, which is completely fine. But there's a difference, there's a gap in the amount of growth that you'll have personally between the two.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And if you've read enough books or talked to enough older people, playing it safe your whole life is the easiest way to live with regrets. And certainly, risk profiles shift for everybody. I don't expect everybody to take my personal risk profile, but you should really assess yours and always be on the edge of that. So that might be full time job and per diem self employment, and that might be where you stay, and that's great. And that per diem self employment pays for an extra vacation, or pays off your student loans or your mortgage earlier, or just as a source of fulfillment. But if you play it safe, or even worse, fall for the trick of a ladder, and this is another thing that I really just can't stand when I hear it when I talk to new grads or early career people, where these huge corporate mills put these ladders in front of you that make you say, "Ah, I know I really want to do this and go into that CrossFit gym, but if I stay here long enough, I'll be a assistant clinic manager, and then clinic manager, and then regional manager, and then maybe one day I could do this." And most of the time, the people who stick around to get to the top of those ladders look around at the top and say, "What the hell did I trade all of this time away for?" And they're either too trapped financially, or they're too trapped because of their arrangements with the business, or they have equity and they have to hold out until the sale, or all these complexities, instead of actually just doing what they wanted to do the entire time.
Yeah, and that was very similar, on my journey, where when I started, I was working as a PT, then I started working per diem, and it got to this point where I had to make a choice to take a bigger risk to essentially stop practicing. So I took the opposite journey that you did. At this point, I'm more business focused than clinician focused. I don't, honestly don't even know if I could treat a shoulder anymore. Um, but uh, when I was talking to Matt, my co-founder, he basically said something which resonated with me deeply, which was, if you really consider it, the bigger risk is not going for it. And
Without
I,
doubt. Yeah.
yeah, and I started thinking about that. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, because if you go with the safe route, what you realize later in life, like you're describing, and is it wasn't as safe as was advertised. And there's a
Right.
lot of stuff in between that you miss out on. Is It's always a trade-off, no matter if you think you're trading something off or not. There is always the trade-off for what could have been.
Without doubt. Without doubt. I take a lot of phone calls from people who are afraid to start. So I have a small unadvertised business coaching service that I don't really make an attempt at growing. It just like grows word of mouth.
Hmm.
And the what the most common inquiry is like, what book should I read to get started? And I still don't know what the right way to answer this person is, because I feel like I'm actually discouraging them or crushing their soul even more when I tell them that there is zero, like there's none. So
Yeah.
I usually say, well, what specifically are you like? Do you feel like you need to learn more about marketing? Okay, we
Hmm.
could talk about marketing books. Or are you worried about cash flow or cash management or like all that stuff? Okay, we can talk about that, but there is no one book, and there can't be one book about just how to get started. You have to just jump in. And I love trying to urge people to take the appropriate risk. Not like Gary Vee. Gary Vee, I'm sure a lot of people follow him if they're interested in this particular webinar. He's sensationalist to a degree of like saying like, just screw it, go all in, quit your job tomorrow, quit your job. Well, if you take too big of a risk and you fail enough, you're out of the game. And the key to success is actually being able to fail enough that you learn and grow without taking yourself out. So that's calculated strategic risks that'll allow you to grow exponentially. So had I stayed at one location,
Hmm.
very profitable, successful right off the bat. I mean, that first location was, I would actually say, easy. It was easy. It was only when we opened up really location number three, which happened to be 10 months after we launched. So we did location number one in January, number two in April, number three in September-ish, September, October. That's only when it started to get insane. And we had stumbled upon just, I would say, the right population, the right message, the right product, and things were just easy. Had I had stayed there and just built like a 6 clinician monster clinic in that first one, I'd probably maybe have the same amount of money as I have now. I don't really know. And but I wouldn't have learned anything. All I would have known was what I knew going into that
Hmm.
launch. Whereas all of the failures that we endured along the way in building Provier and then eventually selling it was like an MBA. It really was.
Yeah, that's the best way to get the MBA is by rocking and rolling and seeing what happens
Yeah.
when you try things. And then eventually you find your core metrics, and you're able to look at things and understand why they happened. And then you can say to yourself, okay, let's just do this over here again.
Yeah.
But you can't
Yeah.
know
Exactly.
if you don't try.
Yeah. You got
That's
to
the big
start.
thing.
So if you're watching this and you're hoping to get some information on how to get started, just start
Yeah, just go.
tomorrow. Yeah,
So let's go into Counter Strike.
sure.
Take us through that venture now. So what are you trying to accomplish there? I know you spoke a little bit about the mission, but let's dive deeper into that.
Yeah, combat athletes, in my opinion, are some of the most fun and exciting to work with in all sports. They are so wildly dedicated to the craft. The craft is ongoing. There's no off seasons. There's no postseason. There's a fight, and then most of the time, these guys the next morning are at a gym doing something. It's just insane what they put themselves through, and I couldn't help but notice with the athletes I was working with that there was just a better way to harness that. That wasn't just telling them to stop or not do something, but the day after the fight, hey, how about you keep your heart rate between 120 and 130 and go for a 40-minute jog? Like that's the right thing to do the morning after a fight if it's appropriate, instead of let's say a high intensity interval training or something bigger. That's just one of many examples where a weight cut, losing 10, 20 pounds in extremely short periods of time, noticing that there was a better way to do it using more of a data-driven, science-based principles. And I really saw the opportunity to help change the few UFC fighter and combat sport athletes that I had on my caseload as a doctor of physical therapy. And I evolved from being their person to go to when they were injured to their performance coach. And that was what spawned this business model.
So how can other PTs think in that same line? What should they start thinking about when they're treating either combat athletes or people looking for performance? Is there something different that they should be thinking there?
Yeah, I mean, it's not being so microscopic. I could zoom in on just their shoulder, but if their shoulder was a function of overtraining, and their overtraining is a function of not sleeping or taking enough rest days, or the way in which they're performing their off mat training, then am I really actually helping change anything, or am I just putting a band-aid on by even treating the shoulder well? I'm talking about like actually fixing that shoulder issue with them is only a tiny piece of the puzzle, and you're just almost setting them up for to come back and back and back. And that's what was
Mhm.
happening. They came to me at Provia for years, and only over the course of time did I start to see these patterns and decide that that was the next phase of my career, is to make a change.
Now, are you just seeing patients for rehab, or are you also helping them with performance sans any injuries?
Yeah, so this is a performance coaching platform. I would actually say I don't identify as a physical therapist on a daily basis in any capacity. I pretty exclusively in the performance coaching realm operate as a performance coach, and that means that we leverage the doctor of physical therapy knowledge to create appropriate strength and conditioning plans to work around or address injuries. But it's so different than this notion of that part of it is physical therapy. It is, okay, your shoulder hurts, what should we do about that? And we just simply solve that problem in the context of their plan, instead of slicing it off and having this bifurcation of that it's something separate. It's not.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest psychological challenges that physical therapists and even other professionals have is that once you graduate, you see yourself in this box and identify as Brett Kestenbaum, physical therapist, as opposed to seeing physical therapy and your knowledge of it as a tool and identify with yourself as a human, as opposed to identifying as yourself as a physical therapist and that's all you are.
Yeah.
So it's an important distinction to make for people out there where use your knowledge as a physical therapist to do what you want to do, because you don't only need to do the things that you believe are in that tight, well, I guess it's not tight for physical therapy, but within that box
Right.
of what is believed to be the things that a physical therapist does.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think it's perfect. And circle back on some of the earlier parts of the conversation. That gets easier when you have a very specific niche and you're solving a specific problem for that niche. So if you're thinking about the general population, it's harder to then separate from the physical therapist title or identity.
Hmm.
If you are thinking about a tennis player, a baseball player, or a combat athlete, and solving exclusively the problems that they encounter on a regular basis, assuming you know and love the population, then you then can separate from the identity and simply focus on somebody who solves a problem for that specific niche.
So, do you have any advice for physical therapists who want to get into either performance coaching or just thinking about PT in other ways, like prehab and things like that?
Yeah, it really takes, this is, I think, the third step, but this is the most important, is getting creative about the monetization strategy. So we are so in the outpatient world hooked on per session charge, that if that's the only way in which we are thinking about how to monetize, you will never then really be able to escape the norm and the creativity needed to solve the problem. So it's, in my opinion, if you really identify your niche, you really have to care about it. Imagine spending nothing else other than solving that niche's problems for 5 years straight.
Hmm.
You have to care so deeply. You can't fake that. Then use your skill sets to solve their problems, monetize the ability to solve that problem in a new or unique way that's not just come to me for a session of time. And that still could be a component of it. I'm not saying you have to forfeit that entirely, but in my case, it was a monthly subscription for performance coaching. So
Hmm.
I offer exclusively membership based services where you are hiring me or someone on my team as a performance coach, and we then create that relationship, and that relationship is an ongoing monthly recurring charge.
Yeah, and this may sound crazy to people out there, but when you're starting your first business, the first time you've ever tried to start a business, don't worry if the business model makes sense or if it's a profitable one. Just do something that you can like identify the fact that you are able to have someone pay you for the service that you want to provide. And then eventually over time you'll start understanding the principles of an effective business model, and then you'll be able to think through, what should I do here, how can I change something around with my payment or whatever so I can provide a lot of value but also make sure that the business is profitable. Because if you're not profitable, at the end of the day you're not going to be able to service as many people, because you'll go out of business or you'll go crazy. One
Yep.
of the two will happen first.
Yep. Absolutely.
So when you were thinking about your business model, how did you think through that?
You know, the old expression. There's an old expression in Silicon Valley where going into business, going into a startup, especially in that world, is like jumping off a cliff
Hmm.
with the parts to a plane, and you're assembling the plane on the way down.
Hmm.
And that's exactly how I did this, in the sense that I didn't have some grand plan that made me think that this is how it would look 8 months later. I just knew that the combat athlete is who I wanted to serve for the foreseeable future, and felt really passionate about solving the need for them, because this was like real people to me. It was like solving the need for Jimmy. Jimmy was a top 10 UFC fighter who I was solving the problem for him. And then I was like realizing that what I was doing is a business model. And then I started to shape the business model based off of conversations with prospective clients
Hmm.
before I had a website, where they would ask, like, what is this? And each call, to be honest with you, in the beginning was slightly different. I would be testing different narratives or what people would care about. And over the course of a couple months, I started to realize what was taking shape, and I'm still molding it. I'm still playing around with price points and packages, but it's working really well.
So how do you identify when one thing is working more than another, like you were just describing, the phone call or the things that you were saying? How do you identify those differences?
It's funny because I just had one of these calls a half hour ago. So right
Hmm.
before this call, I spoke to a word of mouth referral from a fighter to another fighter, and she has a fight October 12th. And the best thing in the world is when they're so emphatically saying, like, yes, yeah, yes, this is what I needed.
Hmm.
Oh my god, yeah, yes. Like the tone was so um all in so quickly. The more I described what I do and the relationship that we were going to have as her performance coach, the depth and the genuineness and the excitement let me know, yep, this is it. And it was conversations like that that have evolved over the course of the few months, that allowed it to develop so quickly.
Yeah, so I think the science behind what you're doing is the fact that you are testing and trying, and the results side of it, or identifying what's working, is more of the intuition and the feeling based upon that response that you're receiving from the individual on the other side. And then if I were to guess, because this went so well in your mind, you're likely to use a similar approach next time
Yeah, yeah,
and see how
absolutely.
it goes, if
It
it's
keeps
reproducible.
repeating itself.
Yeah.
Yep. And then similarly in the actual product phase of it, in the very beginning, I'll give you one thing that didn't work. My Fitness Pal has a feature where you can add yourself as a friend and see each other's diaries. And I was like,
Hmm.
oh, this is awesome. This is like a free platform. My earbuds just died. Speaker might be a little bit different.
Yeah,
Can you hear
yeah, I
me
can still
okay?
hear you. Different, but I can
Okay.
hear you.
Okay. So the my Fitness Pal had that feature, and I was like, oh my god, this is a no brainer. These athletes are competing for sometimes 50, 100, $200,000, and for the amateurs, they're competing for less, but still proportionate to their means. So that, to win $10,000, $20,000 is a huge
Hmm.
deal to some of these people. I put myself in those shoes. If my life depended on partially my weight, I would probably weigh myself every day and track every macro, because this is a weight based sport.
Well, lo and behold, I found very few athletes that are tracking their macros, know what macros are, and very few that are actually tracking their weight. And if anything, they actually avoid looking at their weight and do these catastrophic weight cuts towards the end that totally tank all of the hard work that they put into a fight camp. So, long story short, I tried this MyFitnessPal thing, and no one logged anything. I'd be like selling people on $250 a month plans that included a nutrition coaching component,
Mm-hmm.
and I couldn't get them to be compliant because it is such an exertion and so much effort to
Mm-hmm.
log all of your food. Then had to create a different platform to help coach somebody through their nutrition and weight management, and I did do that with those active clients who the MyFitnessPal attempt failed.
So what were the differences between the
Say again, bro.
more clients on the
Breaking up a little bit. I think you heard what's the difference on the compliance.
um, first is a statement. I believe that from what you're describing that you had more.
Know precisely what you to know exactly what you wanted out of that app in order to make that kind of an investment worthwhile. So licensing apps is really easy and can cost literally $50, $100 a month, sometimes even less. And it's great ways where you can treat exclusively through that, or use it as a ancillary revenue stream to when people discharge from their more traditional care to stay in touch with people.
Do you have any specific particular apps that you would recommend?
Fizzy app or Fizzy Track. Track is the one that the PT would use. Fizzy app is the one that the client would use. Is phenomenal. And while Counter Strike doesn't feature a traditional physical therapy component, I do hold on to twice a week, a couple hours a day, going into New York City and doing just patients in person for usually higher end clients or people that are really motivated from a specific injury and are a combat athlete. But I do a 1 hour evaluation in person as a physical therapist and program them a 4 week plan of care. I do no hands-on treatment. I don't typically see them again.
Mm-hmm.
I might see them for a reevaluation. A lot of times I'll just carry on the relationship digitally.
We're wrapping up, and I believe the connection is getting a little bit choppy at this point. But do you have any advice that you would give to either current practice owners who are looking to install this model, or other people who may not own a practice at this point that are looking to work within this type of model?
Yeah, I mean, from somebody who sold an insurance-based business, in my opinion, even if things are going well, you need to be prepared for when the insurance ecosystem starts to have further collapses. And that's only going to come from being creative. You cannot just look at what you're currently doing and try to attach price points to it. You need to evolve the way that you're working. You need to create new and exciting revenue streams that are based off of solving problems, not just adding services. So if you're just adding a massage therapist and charging for an hour of massage, great, that probably will work. But
Mm-hmm.
what's really more likely to save your future is getting creative about solving a problem for a person instead of just looking at your business and figuring what services you could add and how you could charge money for it.
Perfect.
If you are new grad or a early entrepreneur, like we had said, just start. You need to just start.
Yeah, just start is the best piece of advice that you can ever give anybody who's at the beginning parts of their journey. When it comes to people who are more in the middle or along the way there, start thinking about things more strategically and tactically. Start thinking about your time as your biggest asset, and understand where you're going to be putting your time, and make sure that the decisions that you're making are going to be decisions that you believe are going to have the best outcomes based upon all of that previous information that you've had. Again, Frank, thanks so much for coming on. This has been incredible. You are a wealth of knowledge. Again, congrats on all the success, and best wishes with the newest venture here, which sounds like it's going real well, and it's going to continue going real well at the same time. But where can people find you if they wanted to get in touch?
Sure. Yeah, I encourage you to reach out. I love talking to people about getting into business. I love helping people push themselves out of their comfort zone and get started or take their business to the next level. You could reach me on Instagram at Frank_Benedetto. You could check the listing for this for the spelling. I know last name's a little tough. If you want to check out what we're doing at Counter-Strike, you could head to www.stayonthemat.com. Again, that's stayonthemat.com.
Great, and we'll put all that in the comments for anybody. For anyone who's just joining, this is recorded, so you will be able to watch it at any time. For those of you who have been with us the whole time, thank you so much for listening, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thanks again, Brett.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care.